So this video is about my experience with Wellbutrin. Hey y'all, hope you're doing fantastic. My name is Connor. Been on YouTube a long time, man, I'll tell you what, long time. And shared a whole lot of different types of stuff, a lot of intimate stuff, and some not so intimate stuff. And this video is definitely more on the side of the spectrum of intimacy. For sure, there's some vulnerability in this video. And the primary reason I want to make it is to help other people who are in a similar position, whether that's where I am now or maybe where I was a couple of years ago, or even where I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So this video is about my experience with Wellbutrin. It's a relatively well-known antidepressant. The generic form is called Bupropion, and that's what I had taken for 8 months. So I want to kind of share my story with that. I want to share my story with depression in general. I want to talk about my experience with Wellbutrin, Bupropion, and why I ultimately stopped taking it and where I've kind of landed after not taking it. So kind of as long as I can remember, I've had depression. And I do, I've talked about this a little bit in other videos. I can distinctly remember being quite small, like maybe 6 years old, 7 years old, and middle of the night, just kind of looking out of my window and just feeling the weight of the world. Where does that come from? I think some of this stuff, many of us are just born with it, and a lot of it gets turned on. So it's a combination of nature and nurture. We have it in our chemistry, but then generally something happens to kind of trigger this stuff. It's certainly true with addiction in my beliefs and from what I've studied on addiction behavior. But I think it's relatively true with a lot of things: depression, anxiety, anger. So for me, how do we trace these things back? Like sometimes it's nice to know, well, when I was this age, this thing happened, and then I became this. That can be kind of helpful. It can also be kind of one of those things that you can look for the story forever and you may never find it. But here we are, here we are right now, and we are who we are right now. And how we understand ourselves and make sense of ourselves right now ultimately is the biggest component in what shapes our current reality. What's our current narrative? So it's not that the history and the past doesn't matter. It does. It matters a lot. But what matters even more is this present moment. So where does this stuff come from? I don't really know, but I definitely struggled with it my entire life. And I absolutely know for certain that because of the depression and because of anxiety, that's what sort of led me to become very addicted to alcohol, very addicted to opiates like Oxycontin and lots of other pharmaceutical opiate stuff. That stuff doesn't help, but in a weird way, it kind of does help. And that's the tricky thing is like, for me, for example, like drinking alcohol, it gave me an immediate relief. Didn't give me long-term relief, but it gave me immediate relief for depression. And if you are like me and you've struggled with depression for a long time, you know that, at any given moment, it might be severe, but for the most part, it's just pretty constant. And anything constant like that builds up. And the burden of constant depression gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Even if you don't hit those deep wells of depression, most of us do. If we do struggle with depression, most of us do hit wells. But it's just the constant, that's the part that's really painful, I think. So in getting relief, even momentarily, it can just be like, oh my God, thank Christ, I got out of that, and that's a whole other story, but like that was not easy. Most people, statistically, it's improbable, not impossible. And if that happens to be where you're at, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. And I just feel grateful that things aligned and that I persevered to get through dropping these things from my life. Very powerful. But that didn't necessarily shift my depression. And in fact, there's a momentary kind of period of like getting high from a shift, getting high from being empowered, and taking this really empowered action to stop abusing drugs and alcohol like I was, to move more into health, to move more into self-awareness, to move more into presence and self-connection. All of these things left me feeling like on top of the world for a time. And then this depression just slowly kind of came back. And so for the last decade, since changing my relationship with drugs and alcohol, changing my relationship with what I eat, how I sleep, what I think, who I'm hanging out with, all those things for the positive, I still struggled with depression. And 3 years ago, as some of you may know, had a lot going on relationally. I was making the decision to move out of the house that I was sharing with my son, with my partner, with her partner. Is a difficult and challenging decision for me, and it was a difficult relational transition for sure. And there was just a lot of other things going on, and the fact is, like that was big, but I had been carrying this sort of pain for quite a while and not really sure, like, what the heck am I going to do with this? And I tried so many things, you all. Like, I tried so many things, and unless I was just absolutely perfect with my self-care, I was generally slipping back into feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness. And even when I was perfect with my with my self-care, I could still slip back into those places. Being who I am, I'll just say I'm relatively anti-establishment. I don't really generally just kind of trust the man, as it were. It's not to say that I'm anti-government or I'm anti the medical establishment. I'm not anti any of that stuff, but I'm very suspicious. I go into these things thinking, is this really good for me? Is what they're selling me actually good for me? So when it comes to pharmaceuticals, for one, I have a suspicion of the pharmaceutical industry, which a healthy suspicion of the pharmaceutical industry is good to have. That's a good thing. So I had that, and then I also had, this sense of pride, I think. And I don't need that. I don't need drugs to make me feel happy or to get through something. I don't need the pharmaceutical industry to live life. I'm more powerful than that. I don't have to do that. I can exercise and sleep well and talk to the right people and take care of myself, and I'll be okay. And at some point, I just started looking at that narrative and being like, man, is that really serving you? Is there maybe something here, just a little opening to investigate the possibility? And once I kind of opened up a little bit, it brought some amount of relief and direction. Hey, actually, here's a thing that I have not yet tried. I've tried a lot of things. I haven't actually tried this one thing, and that is taking drugs. Taking drugs prescribed by a doctor for depression. I had actually been on SSRI-based antidepressant when I was maybe 13, something like that. I mean, that's as far back as I was clinically diagnosed with depression, right? I mean, it was happening way before then, but I was diagnosed with depression and given this medication. And I remember after a couple of months just being like, whoa, I don't like this at all, and stopping it. So I had a little experience, but not really. Not as an adult, not as an informed person as I am now, not with the wisdom that I have now, not with the body that I have now. So I was like, let me look into this. And my first step, this is for me, coming from my background. Again, I'm not trying to push anti-establishment stuff on any of y'all. I'm just philosophically, I built myself in a certain way that allows me to feel safe and empowered, and I'm ultimately the voice of reason. I think it's really good to look for outside help, definitely, and I do that all the time, but I try and do that from a place of I take the first step. I didn't want to go to a doctor and ask questions. I wanted to ask myself questions and ask Google questions and do a lot of research. And I reached out to individuals. I let my men's group know, hey, I'm thinking about this thing. They hooked me up with some people that they knew that were taking antidepressants. I talked to those people. I talked to members of my family who are on antidepressants. I did a lot of research on different antidepressants. And ultimately, what I landed on was deciding to try out Wellbutrin, Bupropion. So there's generally, two classes of pharmacological antidepressants, or pharmaceutical antidepressants. That is, antidepressants created by the pharmaceutical industry. There's SSRIs, those are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and there are NDRIs, which is neuroepinephrine and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. So the reason that I landed on NDRI was the side effects, much lower. With general SSRIs, in particular with men, there's sexual issues, sexual health issues, like more difficulty being aroused, essentially, less interest in sex. I don't really want that. There's also some issues with insomnia, with sleepiness, with weight gain. I think those are the big ones, but I'm sure there's other ones, headaches and nausea and things like that. The side effects with Wellbutrin, in general, no sexual side effects. In fact, in some cases, there's an uptick in sexual interest. There is an increase for some in heart rate. Insomnia can be a factor. And in rare cases, seizures. And from what I read, this is one of the primary reasons that Wellbutrin hasn't become the dominant antidepressant promoted on the market. There's general data that definitely shows the efficacy of SSRIs and NDRIs. There's more data supporting SSRIs. That doesn't mean that SSRIs, therefore, are inherently more likely to work for you. It means that there's been more studies that show that they work for you. I think there's been less studies in general on NDRIs. So in any case, I decided on Wellbutrin, and I got online. I got an online doctor initially, and I was prescribed the lowest dose, which in general, there's only 2 doses, 150 and 300. So I started with 150. There's also 2 different forms. There's extended release and there's immediate release, and I got the extended release. So it was 150 Bupropion XR. And I took that for 2 months before I increased to 300. When I increased to 300, I went to a doctor in person and spoke to him. Coincidentally, he had been on Wellbutrin for a time in his life, and he felt like it was a great decision. He didn't encourage, but he was supportive of me increasing my dose based on what I had told him, and he gave me a 6-month supply of that. To go back to when I first started, in general, they say, like, you know, you're not going to feel it right away. It'll take a little while. That was not the case for me at all. I took it within 2 hours. I felt different. It wasn't like I was high, but it was like, for maybe the first time, I felt not depressed, or I felt like I could handle things and I could do things in a way that I hadn't experienced in the past. So it really was night and day for me. It was immediate. I had these check-ins with this online doctor. I think I had a check-in like the week after or something, and I reported that, and she seemed really surprised. And I could argue, can't necessarily make a scientific backed up case for it, but I really don't think this was placebo. This was a change in my chemistry that positively impacted me immediately. And you can imagine, after like 30 years of feeling depressed, to be able to take a pill and immediately feel like I'm not depressed. So the first week, it was kind of a mixed bag. It was kind of amazing, and it was also a little challenging in that sleep was next to impossible. I had really bad insomnia for about a week. The strange thing was that in general, sleep really affects me. Some people not so much. Some people a lot. I'm a lot. If I don't get good sleep, I really feel it. And I would sleep like between 2 to 4 hours a night, and I'd wake up and just be like, I feel pretty good. And my body felt good. My mind felt good. I went, I exercised. I was like swimming at Barton Springs early in the morning. I was journaling. I was like putting in good hours at work, hanging out with my son. I felt good on 2-4 hours of sleep. Over time, that adjusted itself. I'd say by the end of 2 weeks, I was sleeping like I normally do, which is somewhere between 8 and 9 hours a night. And there was an initial sort of somewhat high type feeling, sort of like caffeine, but not like a stimulated sort of sensation. It was more like relaxed, focused, And I don't know how to explain it. Like, I just felt good about myself, but not in an overinflated, crazy way like I felt on other drugs. I felt like what I imagine other people feel like who don't struggle with depression, who just wake up and feel good and they're like, cool, you know, I like life. I'm pretty sure I felt like that, but I felt like that for maybe the first time in my life. So the experience was very profound. Very profound. So during that time, man, I just changed a lot of things. I think, yeah, I had joined this men's group maybe 6 months prior, or yeah, something like that. And I continued meeting with them as I have to this day, almost every week. And then we take a little break for different segments, but essentially I see these guys every week. And that has been a major support system change. I've increased my business capacity. My finances have increased, so obviously that's going to drop stress. My experience as a father has just been amazing. Like, I love being a dad, and so that brings a lot of joy and lowers stress to my life. I have a new partnership, a new wife. You know, I've got an incredible woman who loves and cares for me, and that's going to drop one's stress as well. So there's all these other factors that sort of came into existence while I was on Wellbutrin. I think a lot of those things, I don't want to say, you know, all those things happened because I was on Wellbutrin, but some things definitely wouldn't have happened as smoothly without it. It was life-changing. It has been life-changing. For all of the antidepressant kind of narrative that I had for so long, which I value. I mean, I like that I didn't just nonchalantly take something. It's a serious decision. You know, it's a serious thing to take. But at the end of the day, I'm just like, man, thank God. Like, thank freaking God. So I was aware that antidepressants in general, they run their course. They're not meant for people to be on forever. Some people are on them for decades, and hey, that's okay, you know? But the reality is that most of them stop working 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. They just kind of stop working, and you either have to increase your dose or mix it up and start taking some other kind of antidepressant. And the reason for that is, like, your body adapts, you know? It understands what you're doing, and it's like trying to return to homeostasis, and it realigns. In some cases, your body readapts in a positive. It doesn't just go back to what it was. It changes how it works. And that's the most ideal outcome. Not just that, you know, it's not to say you're supposed to take these drugs, do nothing else, and just hope that they fix you. I really think, like, these drugs need to be combined with deep self-care. And a lot of that has to do with reaching out to help, whether that's a therapist or a coach or just getting in a group, you know, of like-minded people who are going to be there to support you, getting closer to your family, doing good things for yourself as you're on these drugs. You have an opportunity, I think, when you're on these drugs to do things that maybe you couldn't really do before. And you want to try and use that opportunity to solidify a new life for yourself. And that was kind of my approach. In addition, I really do believe that Wellbutrin had a permanent positive effect on my chemistry. I wasn't quite ready to get off of it because it was working and I didn't want to rock the boat. But it was brought up to me, you know, by some very close people in my life, like, hey, is that still serving you? And my initial reaction was like, bro, yeah, like, dude. But I thought about it. I don't know, actually. I don't know if it's still serving me. I've done a lot. I've felt really good, and I'm curious. So I stopped taking it. First day, didn't notice anything. Second day, I felt a little just different. I wouldn't say it was a bad feeling. It wasn't a good feeling, but I did feel a little different, maybe a little spacey. And I think that might have lasted about 48 hours, and then that was it. Again, I have to say, don't do that. You know, like, don't just stop taking your antidepressants. You know, all doctors and on the back of the bottle and everywhere it says don't just stop taking this stuff, because you can have, many people have had, and it's possible for you to have serious backlash from that stuff. So don't just do that because it worked for me. But I also do want to share my real story. This was my experience. And if you are, going to do that, I think the recommended approach is you talk to your doctor, talk to your family, you talk to close friends, you get your support system lined up for you so that everyone knows, here's what I'm about to do. It's kind of a big deal. And then maybe you taper off, I'm kind of extreme, and that's kind of how I roll. I've done that type of extreme, when I make a decision about stuff, I can do it, and that's me. That's not everybody. But that was my choice, and that's how I did it. And I did line up my support system. In my case, it didn't include doctors, but again, that's my thing. But it did include everybody who I was close with knew. So I stopped taking it, and I'd say that's going on not quite a year, but probably 8 months. I've been completely off of it. Oh, actually, did want to add caveat. I have tried it again, by the way, just to see, because I'm a curious cat. And some people take Wellbutrin as just like a one-off thing. They take it for a day and they do whatever it does for them, and then they don't take it. So it is kind of used like that, like these, what do they call them, biohacker folks. I've seen some videos, promoting it as a biohacking tool, as like a one-off thing. So that is a thing. I wouldn't necessarily encourage you or recommend it, but I was curious, so I tried that. And I have to say, man, anytime I've taken it as a one-off thing, I've also taken it for like a week at a time. I've never had the same experience that I did when I was first on it. And if anything, I don't like it. It doesn't feel terrible, doesn't even feel bad, but it's not as good as my current reality. So, I'm done. Like maybe down the road, I'll never say never, but maybe down the road. But for now, yeah, like I'm all set. And do I still get depressed? Hell yeah, of course I get depressed. I'm a human being. But I think I showed my brain new ways of dealing with life, new ways of processing, new ways of being through a drug that then solidified and said, oh, actually, I think that's a better way to be. I think I'll do that. And so by and large, I would say my depression has shifted like 75%, maybe 80% since taking Wellbutrin and now being off of it. Yeah, I had a lot of shame about taking Wellbutrin for a long time. I felt like I didn't want to tell anybody, just people who were close to me. I felt like maybe it was a little bit of a cop-out. I felt like I'm not a whole person, I'm not complete, and so I need this thing. And like, if you're feeling any of that stuff, it's so not true. It's so not true. Yeah, you're awesome. And like I said, where does this stuff come from? I don't know. We don't have to know. Some of us have tough stuff this life, and that's all right. That's all right. And if you feel like you need drugs to maybe help you through it, to gain perspective, you need some help, get that help, man. Get that help for sure. Would love your comments. I don't think there's that much more to add to this video. Like I said, do your own research, talk to a doctor, definitely. Talk to people who maybe know people who've been on these different drugs, if it's something that is of interest to you. Like, really do your own research for a while before making that decision, because I do think it's a really big deal. It should be taken very seriously. I feel like a new version of myself, and that's pretty incredible to be able to say. So thank you for honoring me, for listening to me, for sharing this space with me, and I respect you and I honor you right back. Take care.